Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
All right, well, welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Richard Shaw, Father Shaw. He's been a Catholic priest in the Albany Diocese for over 40 years. He's written 6 or 7 books. This is his latest book. It's called Naked as the Jailbird, a raw narrative of life behind bars. Father Shaw has been involved in prison ministries for over 40 years.
Yeah.
Currently, he's sort of semi-retired at Coxsackie and Green Correctional Facilities. His book, however, are a compilation of his journals. He's been keeping a journal or a diary since his high school days. And the book is a compilation of his first 10 years of prison ministry, mainly concerning when he worked in Albany and Rensselaer County jails, roughly 72 to 82.
Yeah.
All right,
just
so
about the time.
Welcome, Father Shaw. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you, Joe. It's good to be here.
Now, your book's very interesting, very poignant in times. You cover a wide range of things. However, you got into the prison ministry sort of by accident. Why don't you
I was studying
talk a little bit about that? You were a priest for 4 or 5 years, and then
and in my 4th year of priesthood, I went over to Boston to study for the year. Actually, I went into a novitiate for a religious order, but came back out after decided to go back to the diocese. But while over there,
you were going to become a Franciscan, right?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a list of volunteer jobs on the board, and one of them was the Charles Street Jail, and everything else they wanted for I've been doing. So I went down there, and I'd never really been on the inside of a jail. I mean, back in the bowels of the jail before. And Monsignor Burke was a really great teacher. And then when I came back, again, quite accidentally, I was at the funeral of a young woman who I was very fond of, who graduated Catholic High and then died very early. And a correction officer who was a pallbearer came over to me and said, you know, no priest is going to the Rensselaer County Jail. And it was like, I've always likened that to Paul being called over to...
Yes, you write about this as being sort of your road to Damascus moment.
Yeah. Well, not Damascus. It's later. It's halfway through the Acts of the Apostles.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Where Paul has a vision of a human being saying, come over to Macedonia.
Yeah, okay.
And that was important because we think of Europe as we're Euro-centered. But that for him was a step out into the wilderness. Okay. And even though it was Rome controlled.
Well, you did the prison thing in Boston a little bit when you were thinking about being a Franciscan. Did you think you were going to end up in
No.
Until this?
No, when I came back to the Capital District and resumed teaching, I just put it out of my mind, but I was, kind of mesmerized by what had happened. And then that incident happened in the cemetery, and the next day I went to Rensselaer County Jail. I'm still there.
And now your book is, you were saying you've been keeping a diary since high school. And this book is your diaries.
Well, it's actually not a diary, it's a journal. A diary is oftentimes somebody keeping a list of what they did every day.
Oh, okay.
Thus it gets its name. And in fact, when I went from the jails to the state facilities, my predecessor said to me, keep a diary. And a diary is oftentimes, because he said it covers you in case somebody says you aren't doing it at a certain time. No, on Wednesday the 18th I was doing this. But a journal, I write in it, possibly once a week. And I just, I write what I'm thinking at the moment. And since I've been keeping it since the late 1950s, you go back and there's some things you don't even remember doing. Mm. And very important for the book, it captures what you felt about something at that moment. I call it a raw narrative because it's uncooked. If we look back on things, we tend to cook things in our memory to the way we want to see them. We'll give judgments on something the way we feel about it now. But any judgments I make in there, and some of them very negative about other people, was what was rolling off my reaction to it at the moment.
Well, before we talk about maybe how edited they were, it doesn't seem like much. What was it like? I think you were telling me before we started, you hadn't really revisited your journals too much until you started working on this. What was it like to read, like some of the things you wrote, your 31-year-old self?
A lot of times you look back and think, boy, was I an idiot.
And so how edited, when I say edited, are these verbatim from your journal, or do you just fix them up a little bit? Or
Mostly.
I mean, they seem very, to me, from reading it, they seem very immediate, that they don't seem like you're putting in any kind of 40 years later perspective. It seems like it's of the moment.
I purposely kept that in it. But of course, if I put in the whole journal, which I'm typing to disk now just for the heck of it anyway, it would have been massive in size.
Yeah.
And since it's a book about jails, I kept just as much at the beginning and the end of a day to point out that I wasn't living in jail. I was teaching, coaching, and in a parish at the same time. And that gave balance to everything. I tried to keep that in the selections. As far as it being original, did you notice I kept to the end notes at the back of the book?
Yes, you have.
Something that was in the text originally, and that is that I cited the date that I wrote anything.
The dates in the back are your journal entry dates.
Right. And if you look at that, you will see that I've combined some of them. But I always tell you this was made up of this and this. And I've kind of taken it out of chronology. It's in rough chronology.
It's more or less in order,
Yeah.
more or less.
Yeah, if you went back and counted down the dates, but every now and then something would revert to a different date, and it's because, okay, I'm thematically doing this now, but everything you're right, it's the moment. Sometimes I wanted to change what I felt about something. Somebody could read through the first 50, 60 pages of that, even a little farther, and think, my God, he's at war with all the officers or something like that. I'm very pro-officer, I'm very pro-cop. They've got the toughest jobs in the world. But it would be, I've always said about jail and prison ministry, you earn your turf in inches. You don't go in and own the place and have prerogatives, but if you're there.
Well, you even write in the beginning here, you were sort of had to earn your way too.
Absolutely.
They didn't. They even said they sort of pretended you couldn't come and do ministry because they were just giving you the.
When the last jail I started, and I go there every week, the Catskill jail, right near where my parish is, and simply because of my age, I thought to myself, I hope this is the last institution I have to get used to, because it's them getting used to you. And if you've been for about 10 years, I did Schenectady County Jail, and I'd have to adjust the knob of my television set in my head, because by that time in both Rensselaer and Albany County, I was the old man on the mountain. And then I took on Schenectady, and it involved the whole process of who is this coming into the building, and you build up trust slowly.
Yeah, well, you even write about even when the political aspect of some of the things in here we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. When there's a new election and a new sheriff, they bring in their own people.
That's the nature of politics.
There is a lot of political aspects to this. You've chosen to write about your first 10 years of your prison ministry. In the beginning of the book, you say, the journal excerpts in this account are from the first decade of my ministry, when I still maintained a sense of shock about what I was encountering. What was so shocking? I mean,
It's a whole different reality. It's like flying to the land of Oz, and ending up in the witch's castle. It's a world you never knew, and a lot of times people who are making great statements about jails and prisons aren't on the inside. I hope you'd agree that's not a tell-all book. It's how somebody who doesn't know that scene and comes from a middle-class background had to learn a whole different way of patterning.
Well, yeah, and you do give a sense in the beginning there. You even said a couple times, well, "What am I? Am I an idiot, or am I, what am I doing here?"
It's a lot like being any kind of person who is a social service or problem-solving person, be it school teacher, be it social worker, be it somebody in probation or parole. My academic chair, this was my second book actually about prisons, but first was my doctoral dissertation. And my academic chair was a great man, Dr. Hans Toke. And he had done studies on officers and other personnel about stress. And he insisted that I make that my doctoral dissertation. And we made up questionnaires and sent them out around the whole country and sort of on a Likert scale, does this stress you? And it was very fruitful. But has been shown, as has been shown with officers and oftentimes chaplains, you've been in something for a long time and then you go through a stage of burnout and then you come out on the other side. And some of the best officers you'll have be somebody who came through that process and ends up post-burnout, something of a wise person. And they're the most, they have a great perspective.
You've been doing this for what, 40
Yes,
years
in
now?
1972 I began. I've been doing it ever
Now,
since.
did you go through that series of stress to burnout to
At least once a week.
Well, one thing you really give a sense of in the book, the people you're dealing with, that you minister to, both men and women, all races, ages, colors, creeds, class, the role that poverty plays in this, and some of the people, now I guess you've dealt with many bad people, but some of the people, I don't want to say the circumstances of their lives they just sort of ended up here, and they're not really.
Joe, one of the reasons I wrote that, culling every incident out of my journal, was to capture something of the chaos that you're saying. You don't want to generalize about different people you meet. Every story is different. We can undramatize so much about people who are incarcerated. They're just people who got in trouble, and they're dealing with very human issues. And I never wanted to make a general statement about them. I tried to present as many types of individuals you meet, and you're quite right. Poverty plays a huge role in it because, first of all, you become very conscious, especially on a county jail level. People don't realize that county jails, by nature, are the worst place in the criminal justice system because they have to be run as maximum security facilities because the person who's eventually going to do life for being a serial killer is put in the same area with a 16-year-old who was stealing hubcaps. They'll get sorted out once they go to a state facility, but here they're all together. And what you learn is how inaccessible the road to justice is for somebody who has no money to pay for a lawyer or doesn't know politicians. That's a biggie. The people, their kid gets in trouble, you call the local politician. Big mistake on parents' part. They get them out of trouble, and then the kid thinks that he can play the game of disobeying the law, and somebody will bail him out.
Well, one of your first eye-opening experiences you mentioned is the kid who he couldn't pay his court fee, and he was stealing shirts, and he was in this place in Boston. It just sounded.
And what would blow my mind, I was a novice in the Franciscans, and you go back and you have these academic meetings about what's poverty supposed to be, and I want to say, can I bring somebody to talk to you?
One thing you write about too, you write a lot about the people who are involved, not the prisoners, but the people in charge of them, be it correction officers, social workers, lawyers. You write about the jailed and the jailers, the incarcerated and those who incarcerate. I mean, you're sort of like they're all in it together in some kind of crazy.
This is why I wanted to write this book. I think I can claim that this book is unique in one sense, a couple of senses. It's like I was walking around with a camera tied to my head, and you're getting what I experienced, not what I wanted to see, not what I wanted to draw into a generalization, but this is what I would meet. And what that book is kind of taking a deck of cards and making it make sense in some order, but it is as did happen, and there's that element always of chaos. It's hard to be academic about jails.
And you were constantly, and again, I don't think this is anything on purpose, but just your situation, you're sort of constantly contrasting the inside, the outside.
That's why
your life as going and ministering and then going back and coaching track and really.
Do you remember there was one scene in there where I'm in my parish in the morning. They were going to have a turkey dinner in the afternoon, and they were all the time their mass. It was like Thanksgiving morning. You could smell the turkeys coming out of the kitchen in this multi-purpose building. Then I went to the jail, and there was a huge fight at mass because some guys were brought in, and the guys who were there got very protective about this being a sacred place. And these guys were in there to do gang business. And it ended up in a yelling, fight. And with them getting thrown out. And you'll notice that there's no swearing in the book, but I let you,
Well, you put the
fill in the
little-
dots.
yeah.
And you can just, they were yelling that back. And then the third liturgy I went to was a confirmation at that Son of Justice parish, where it was as artsy craftsy as you can get. And I drove home deciding that the best mass was the one at the jail.
I know you write up. Well, like I say, I think the people in the prison and jail, they're living sort of more. What's the word? More on the edge of things. You capture your service that day was a little more. You contrast it with. I
Sometimes
think going to like the confirmation, and it was like this was the 70s, of course, and it was kind
In fact, what I love is the fact that, again, you just write what you see, like a camera going. And if you remember in that scene, they were going to begin the confirmation thing with a guy dancing down the aisle, blowing fire out his mouth.
Yeah.
It was a circus theme.
a circus-themed confirmation, so it must have been the 1970s.
But Bishop Broderick came in, and he's the son of a fireman, and he said, the fire spewing guys out.
Another thing, I mentioned poverty before, but another thing that you bring up in here a lot, the difference between, quote, a bad person and the toll mental illness takes on people.
Oh, yeah.
How do you?
Did you get to the scene yet?
I got to page around 100. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what.
The scene where, out of nowhere, there's this old guy, derelict, who's a street person who's in and out and in and out. And there was a peace prayer on the back of the missalette, and it was written by Pius XII. And I said to these kids in front of me, as a joke, I said, probably among the officers here and you guys, Frank and I are the only one who can remember who Pius XII was. And he said, and he was very straightforward as an interview, he says, I shook hands with Pius XII once. And I knew he would not be faking it. And as it turns out, he was part of the Liberating Army in 1944. Okay. And they had an audience in the Sistine Chapel. And Pius, welcomed the troops. And can you imagine that, how many years? That's 30 years after the experience. Yeah. No, it's 20 years at that point. I can't add.
Yeah, I didn't get to that part, but that's...
that's a deeply moving reality, and that captures so much of what jail is, everything all at once.
You didn't stop, obviously. You've been doing this for 40 years. What kept you going in this ministry as opposed to going back to teaching in high school or a parish? Why do you think you stayed in prison ministry for 40 years?
Actually, one of the reasons I tried to capture more than just the prison, I think anybody who does work in a prison or a jail should balance that with something else. I miss teaching. I taught for 12 years in high school, then 10 years first at Maria College and another 10 years at Siena College as an adjunct. And finally, when I was doing the 2 state prisons, and getting older, I let teaching go, and I miss that. Yeah. I love being part of a parish. I have 2 parishes just south of Cooksaki. I'm in Athens and Catskill.
But you did that while you were...
Always.
Okay.
I've never not been in a parish. And I want to be in a parish as a praying community. But I want the parish also. Every Sunday in Catskill and Athens, we pray for the inmates in the jail. Every now and then somebody will complain about that, but we say geographically they are in this parish.
Well, you have you mentioned a few things about when you were still teaching at Catholic High and working in the county jails, of people sort of saying, hey, quit talking about these prisoners and quit talking about all this stuff here.
Actually,
well, there was one thing I read where the girl gave you a letter about, it was a Christmas card thing, and they didn't want anything to do with...
That was her father.
People to do with prison.
And every year, I still do it, pass out Christmas cards. And back then, when it was a simpler world, I'd always collect them with stamps on them. Okay. Now that would cost a fortune for people to even do, and I think a lot of people don't send out cards because of the expense. But I go around all the different grammar schools, both public and private, asking kids to bring in holiday cards with a stamp. And I usually had like 4 or 5 for everybody in the 3 jails. And I got this sanctimonious letter from a father he was claiming you're misusing children doing this, and he misused his daughter, making her carry. She was so embarrassed. And he said, well, if you do these for the victims of crime, maybe I'd let you, but my daughter is forbidden to bring any card to this. And I just bit my tongue. I felt so sorry. She was blushing as she came up to me with the letter.
I think there is, sometimes it's hard for a lot of people to have sympathy for people in prisons, no matter, I mean,
You know, if you, every now and then when somebody gets angry that they want to have a halfway house in their neighborhood, my answer to them is at least you know who they are.
Yeah.
You walk down the city street, and I would guess, I would bet that you could freeze frame anybody on a crowded street, and you would have all the different character types you would see in jail.
I would probably, yes. We mentioned poverty and mental illness, but one thing that comes through in your book too, in the parts I read, that we may not think about as much, the effects of crime has on the families of the people in prison is like an amazing toll it takes on. I was wondering, what do you?
You see that on visiting days. Right now, with the budget cutbacks in New York State, they've cut back on what was called the free bus, and that would be mostly from the city. Mothers, wives. People say, "Why? I don't want my tax money going for this." Hey, it's a no-fun ride. They have to go like 1:30 in the morning down to a place in Manhattan where they get the bus. They ride all night long in the bus throughout New York State to go visit prisons, and they get like an hour with their son or husband and then ride the whole thing back. That's devastating to people. When you have a child of your own get in trouble and you've tried, as is often the case, to do everything. Oftentimes it'll be one child out of a family, and why did we go wrong with him? And I don't have any answers. I still don't have any answers, but it's devastating to family.
And another thing you bring up, sort of the ironies and absurdities, not a lot, but our criminal justice system on occasion. The case of was it Adam Brandt?
Yes.
It was a little thread through your book, and it was almost like what the Charles Dickens, the case that went on forever.
He was accused of cattle rustling in Florida. And
well, that alone is...
he had notarized bills of sale. But the guy that was after him was a very powerful lawyer and rich man. And it, to me, was just so obvious, the guy. And I'm not quick to take a cause up because I don't know whether they're guilty. Everybody's got their own thing. And I've learned to say over the years, if I saw it, I know what happened. But every now and then, even if somebody was guilty, the process by which he was found guilty or she was dishonest. And I ended up, for years, fighting for the kid. And he escaped from a prison, minimum security, because he was being raped so much. He was a very good-looking kid. He was almost like an invitation for some people to go after him with assault. Worst kind of, scenario oftentimes in a facility. And he ended up splitting the scene and ended up in New York, ended up doing almost a year in the county jail. And I began to write to governors and so forth like that. And it was a long, slow process.
Well, you wrote to governors of New York, Florida, California.
Yeah.
And
because he again, when we had him out on bail for a while, and when it was decided that he had to go back to Florida, he split again. And because I was the one who had arranged the bail with Judge Jalakis, a great guy, so people presumed I knew where he was, and as I think I wrote in there, because it was what you would have written at the time of a journal, I said, if I did know, I wouldn't tell them. But I do hope that he got away this time and that he could spend the rest of his life in anonymity. He didn't. He was picked up in California. He started to run again at a time when he was out waiting adjudication. And he had, at this point, gotten married and had a little girl, and he let them ship him back to Florida. And actually, once he was in Florida, he was dealt with very sanely. And he wrote me from the prison where he was, thanking me. I mean, you get that very little. You're following the case of Kyle, the guy that gets so hideously burned. Yeah. All these years later, I just got a letter from him, and even though that's the first 10 years, and the letter was just a couple years ago, it made it for an interesting footnote from him. He really did get his life together, but you have to read that in its stages as it goes through.
Now, you don't sugarcoat anything, do you? I mean, there are some people who need to be put away. Was that safe to say? I mean,
over the years, I've decided that we over-incarcerate in this country, no doubt about it. I think, and I'll probably get people angry saying this, that you could open the doors of every facility in this country and let about 80% of the people out.
The nonviolent mainly.
And that same crowd, yes, nonviolence is a big thing. The other 20% involve predators and predator crimes. But how many people, and when I said that slice of life on a city street, have done crimes for which they have never been caught, regardless of their social background?
Well, I was wondering if you would like to comment on something. I'd like you to read the very last paragraph of your book. This is after the end of your first 10 years as a prison minister,
Jail.
jail. And in the beginning, you say, "This is when I still maintained a sense of shock," and this is sort of how you ended up 10 years later. Just the life is too short. Just read that last paragraph, then maybe you could.
Good thing I brought my glasses, Joe.
Yes, right.
Life is too short to divide people into rigid categories. The simple message of Jesus is that we reach out and share life with one another. This cannot exclude those who are either wrongly or rightly imprisoned. This is essentially what jail ministry eventually must teach those who are in it. These men and women have become my brothers and sisters. They have become my life. It's as simple as that.
Well, now, how did you sort of reach? I mean, I know you're a priest and but how did you sort of reach that?
If anything, it's working with those who are never going to get out. That I was for the death penalty back before I started working in jails, and I would throw out to the public that after dealing sometimes with the worst predators, I'm now adamantly against the death penalty. The guy out of Fort Hood who came in and shot everybody up, I'm hoping they won't give him the death penalty, not because I think he in any way shouldn't be punished to the max, but you make martyrs out of people. To me, somebody sentenced to life without parole is far more frightening than to put them out of life in this world. And what does it cost to feed them that long? Far less than to go through the whole appeals system in this country.
Well, now I should tell people, Father Shaw is going to be here at the library on Tuesday, November 19th at our noon author talk. He's going to be talking about his book, and people want to come and talk to him, ask him some questions. Do you have to, would you like to sum up? Are you going to be publishing any more of your diary, or is this?
Well, I'm typing it and keeping it very carefully, and I imagine after I've been dead about 50 years. Well, I just finished listening to the tapes of Jacqueline Kennedy.
Oh, okay, that book, yes.
Yeah, very powerful. It was a matter of weeks after the assassination when she sat down with historian Henry Schlesinger.
And it was like 7 or 8 hours long, wasn't it? Or
if not longer.
Okay.
And it's amazing that, and of course it was stipulated that it had to be 50 years before that was known.
Oh, okay.
And 100 years for anything having to do with the assassination.
Okay.
And so those, we won't see it, Joe.
So you think you may make another book out of?
Anybody who has, I'm not sure if I ever would, anybody who has ever done research historically, when you find George Templeton Strong, he kept a diary in New York for Samuel Pepys in London.
Yeah, I think there's many.
And in high school, you always had to read The Great Fire of London. But the interesting part of a regularly kept journal or diary is it's everyday stuff. And sometimes what becomes the most fascinating are the things that are just written as an aside that will have captured the day. It's like when you pick up a newspaper to see a major story, and it's the minor story that catches your eye. And diaries become invaluable. Every now and then they're lost. When I was researching a biography for Archbishop Hughes in New York, it did exist. There was a diary kept by a priest for some 30 years. And it does not exist anymore. And you think, there was one bishop who had a correspondence with St. Teresa of Lisieux. And when her letters are very interesting. She was brilliant in her own simplicity. They lost it.
Oh.
There's some things that are lost to history. You think of the fire of the library at Alexandria.
Oh, I know. It's
one copy of all or again, the great book, How the Irish Saved Civilization. They were down to, as far as we know, only one copy of Caesar's Gallic Wars. Right. And you had Irish monks starting to copy. They were mad for copying stuff. Thank God.
Well, I just, there was a book out last year or 2 years ago called The Swerve, how this one book on the nature of things by the Roman philosopher, how it made it through history, and it ended up, you know,
I
influencing a
love
lot
the
of
fact
people.
that Shakespeare's plays have come to us because an actor decided to collect them together. And what we call the corpus of his work was done by...
It was a lot of the actors remembering the
it was one actor in particular who decided Will Shakespeare's play should not be lost. And the first quarter, as they call it, it came out, and that's when they had books that they were just no longer scrolls, but you'd slice the pages, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you so much for coming. A really interesting book, very immediate. It's got a lot to say about all kinds of subjects, not just jail, but Naked as a Jailbird, a raw narrative of life behind bars. Father Shaw is going to be here at the library Tuesday, November 19th at our noon author talk. Starts at 12:15, and he's going to be talking about his book, and you can ask him questions or come and agree or disagree with him. So thank you for coming.
I can take either.
All right, and then we'll see you next time on Meet the Author.